Right there is what I want to talk to you about. I know you haven't got long, you've probably got about another 10, 15 minutes. But before you go, I want to talk to you about your beard, because there's a tie into your beard in this, and that you were talking about there about democracy. Um, Tell me about Edmund Burke and the Fourth Estate, right? Tell me why the free press is so important to democracy. You know the history. Tell us about it.
Well, Edmund Burke, of course, was a statesman, a British or an English statesman back in the late 18th century. And at that time, as I understand it, there were three houses in Parliament, two in Commons and one in Lords. And he got up at one point, made a major speech in Commons, and he said, now, we three estates here, two in Commons and one in Lords, do very important work. But there would be no democracy were it not for the Fourth Estate.
The fourth estate.
Yes, the Fourth Estate, you gentlemen there up in the press gallery.
Yeah,
You,
it was upon the opening of the House of Commons to the press, wasn't it? It was upon the opening to the press that he made this speech.
yeah, so it was a major occasion. And he said, you people keep us honest. Without you all, we would not be able to preserve our democracy. So that was the Fourth Estate, okay? Now, the Fourth Estate is a shambles, in my view. The good news is that there's a Fifth Estate. The Fifth Estate is Julian Assange. The Fifth Estate is alternative media. They're trying to control all that right now, but they couldn't control WikiLeaks, and they still can't. And there's the rub.
Yeah.
That's why they're going after Julian. That's why they're forgetting all about the Magna Carta and all the rights that these, when there were British nobles, could wrest those things from a king. Forget about all that. We do what the United States wants us to do. That's just hunky dory. And if they want us to torture, they want us to keep a fellow in prison susceptible to infection, and we'll do it. And if they want us to extradite him, we'll do that too. That's the saddest thing
Yeah.
that I think, in a personal way, has happened over the last year. I'm a friend of Julian Assange. I make no bones about that. I used to visit him in the Ecuadorian embassy. And when I saw him being dragged out unceremoniously down those steps to be imprisoned, and how disheveled he was, and how I learned later they wouldn't give him a razor to
Hmm.
shave. I decided that this was so important to me that I would try to find some sort of symbol, some sort of way to demonstrate solidarity with Julian. And on the spot, and this is what, March 11th of last year, I decided I wouldn't shave my beard, and I haven't cut a hair since then. My wife is just as eager as I for Julian Assange to be freed. But until he is, I'm going to wear this because every time I look in a mirror or pass by a window, it reminds me of Julian. And you don't see anything about Julian in the Western press, at least not in our country. And this is about as bad as it gets because the poor guy was framed from the beginning. The UN has said he was twice, they've said he was subject to arbitrary detention. And Niels Melzer, the UN rapporteur for torture, has said that he's been a victim of torture. So, what kind of civilized country are we? We and our British ancestors, not very civilized anymore. And it gives me great pain. The only one good thing that eventuated here was the notion, not the notion, the reality that during his captivity in the Ecuadorian embassy, he fell in love. Well, falling in love is wonderful. And the young lawyer that he fell in love with, they had two little children, two little boys. And now we know. Stella Morris is the name she uses.
Hmm.
It's the real name. But there are photos of Julian with little, what's his name? Forget now. but they're there and they're dear. And to me, they say, "Yes, Julian, hang in there." There's certainly an extra reason now to persist, to hang in there, to make sure that justice is done finally. So I haven't lost hope. And of course, if Julian hasn't left hope, how can the rest of us lose hope? So those things mean a lot to me, and I think that we all need to kind of pay attention, and be reminded in whatever tangible way. Mine is this horrid thing. You know, when people say to me, "Why do you look that way, McGovern?" I'm reminded of, well, let's see, what Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was visiting a prisoner. What's his name now? Anyhow, he said, "What are you doing in there?" And the prisoner was he was protesting the taxes that were financing the war to take Texas from Mexico. And he said, "Well, what are you doing out there?" And so when people say, "Well, what are you doing in such a disheveled state?" Or "What are you doing so unkempt?" I want to say, "Well, what are you doing kempt? You know, what are you doing
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's he wrote to me, Ray, last year, from just after I wrote to him and he wrote back to me, and he asked me to save his life. Um, he mentioned how for 7 years he's been in arbitrary detention, and for the last 2 years he's been gagged, and now, for the last year now he's been in basically solitary confinement, or in medical facilities within our Guantanamo Bay. And, you know, he hasn't had access to his lawyers. He hasn't even had access to the case files. He hasn't had access to a library. He hasn't had even access, he has to compete with access for the phone calls to even make a phone call. And meanwhile, on the other side, you've got the world's greatest superpower who's had, or factions within the greatest superpower ever, who's had a decade and untold millions of dollars to prepare for this case. This isn't justice that he's seeing. This is, Steve Poikonen says calling this a kangaroo court is an insult to kangaroos. And I truly believe that. See, I've never met Julian Assange like you. I can't call him a friend. He's just wrote to me and I wrote to him the ones. I'm not a big fanboy of his. I've never met him. In my experience, people who are intelligent are incredibly difficult to be friends with. They can be arses, some of them can. But for me, what he represents, Ray, is the fourth estate. And he represents, him and WikiLeaks, they represent the fourth estate in the digital age. For me, the fourth estate, or the media, the job of the media is basically four things. You're to either gather information or to be a point where people with information can impart that information to you. You then are meant to verify that information is true, publish it on a platform if it is in the public interest, and there's no doubt that what WikiLeaks do is in the public interest. And number four, and this is a very important one, protect your source, the source of that information if it was given to you anonymously, because that source could be people who are doing that, and it would get them in trouble. And this is why the fourth estate is protected. This is why you're protected by law to not give your source up, because this holds those first three estates to power. And what he's done with WikiLeaks is taken the fourth estate and those fundamentals of the fourth estate in the analog age, and transferred them flawlessly into the digital era we are now in. And that is why I believe that they want him so bad. They want to keep their secrets, because if you look at what WikiLeaks have published, over 1 million documents on average over the last 15 years since their inception, all of them being, none of them have been proven to be false. The veracity and the truthfulness is there for plain to see. It's flawless. This is something that, if it was implemented across all of our media, would give us, for the first time, I believe, a true working democracy. Do you agree, mate?
I do, Gordon. And what I would add is simply that in a very real way, this is biting off our nose to spite our face. Let me explain. WikiLeaks was not up and running before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We have asked people in the FBI, CIA, the Federal Aviation Administration, Red Team, who ran checks on airports and airplanes. We asked people who were really just out of their minds because nobody would pay attention to the dangers that they saw, and no one would react to the reports that showed that this was coming. NSA had information. A lot of them had information. So we have asked these people, suppose WikiLeaks was available before 9/11. Would you have gone to WikiLeaks? And they said without exception, sure we would have. We pulled our hair out. This team in the Federal Aviation Administration, this red team that was tasked to go into airports, see if they could get into planes with bombs, simulated bombs. Well, they could, 9 out of 10 times they could do it. So they're pulling out their hair. Why can't you invest $100 to put a lock on the cockpit door, for God's sake, you know? They wouldn't do it. And so these people have said, if WikiLeaks were available, we would have gone to WikiLeaks as a last resort, hoping that their secure way of getting our information would protect us. We would have done that. Wow. Now, fast forward. COVID-19. What a bunch of foul-ups there have been.
I know.
What people who knew what the leaders of our respective nations, how they were screwing up, how they weren't taking this seriously. Medical doctors who could say, look, if we don't do this pretty soon, well, what if WikiLeaks were advertised as being more available to them? Would they, out of their concern for humanity, have gone to WikiLeaks and exposed this with some document?
You're damn right they would.
I think they would have, you know? And what would that have meant? Well, there were some figures. If we had one more week of forewarning, we could have done with, the last figure I saw was that it was 10 times or 11 times as many people as perished on 9/11 would have been saved, just if we had done 1 week earlier, known about what we needed to do. So, biting off your nose to spite your face, or cutting off your nose, people don't realize that without this kind of escape hatch, without this kind of place to get their information into the public consciousness, we're pretty much doomed. And I think that we have to just keep plugging away here and realizing that it's an uphill struggle, and not be expecting immediate results. I mean, Dan Berrigan, one of my favorite patriots, used to say, now, results, they're not unimportant, but they're secondary to the goodness of the act.
Yeah.
Do the act speaks for itself. You let the results go to the four winds, knowing that maybe not you, but maybe some people who come after you will have this kind of success that we all crave, but may not be in the immediate offing. Just keep plugging, know where you stand, and stand there.
Well, certainly, when it comes to the truth, I shall keep pushing against the dam and hoping that the truth comes through. And I know you will, and your fellow, your colleagues at VIPS, and I know plenty of people at the Action for Assange crew are all fighting as well. And hopefully there'll be enough of us that one day we'll all be pushing and the dam will break and all the truth will finally come forward. But until then, Ray, I want to thank you for being a patriot, because that's what you are, I believe, a true patriot. And thanks very much for your time. I wish we had more time, because honestly, I could talk to you for hours. I really do.
Thank you, Gordon. Perhaps some other time.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Ray McGovern, everybody. Great stuff. Thank you.